Like in your book, you focus on the disciples in Matthew.
Yeah.
How does Matthew use the disciples as characters to shape the reader's experience in understanding Jesus?
Yeah. I'm trying to think if I want to compare with Mark, because I did a little bit of what I did was set up what scholars had been saying about the Matthean disciples, the disciples in Matthew. In Mark, it's clear, they're dull, they're hard of heart. I mean, they're just some really heavy descriptors of the disciples in Mark. In Matthew, it's moderated a bit. I mean, some of those descriptions aren't used. And then they understand some things. They understand that he was talking about this. They understand that he was referring to John the Baptist at this point, So there was this argument in scholarship, especially out of a comparison with Mark, redaction criticism, that the disciples in Matthew essentially understand. So my dissertation set out to say, no, they don't. Because I wasn't going to do a narrative read, and they don't understand a whole bunch of stuff. If you just read narratively, you don't kind of look at Mark in comparison. You say, oh, they mess this up. They don't get that. When Jesus says, I must go to Jerusalem and suffer and die, in chapter 16, Peter says, this will never happen. Lord forbid this would ever happen to you, right? And Jesus has to say, get behind me, Satan. Oh my goodness, you are spouting the wrong things and not the right things, the things not of God, but human things and worse, right? So they don't understand. It was easy to argue. It wasn't a hard sell, really. But what does that do? That's really good. And besides not understanding, they are so very clearly identified 5 times as those of little faith, not no faith, but little faith, which in chapter 17 we learn is inadequate faith. Because if you just said the faith of a mustard seed, you could have done this, so just a little bit more. So what do those characterizations do? I think, and I did look at that in one of my chapters in my dissertation, which nobody's going to read, but you can get the condensed version in one of the chapters of the book, is that we both identify with the disciples because they follow Jesus, right? They do some things right. Sure. And they do understand some things, and they're closest to him. So we as if we read as believers, we tend to identify with the disciples, but we also then kind of pull back from the places where they don't understand, because we understand. In their misunderstanding, Matthew helps us to hear what's really true about Jesus, right? We know he's going to go to Jerusalem and suffer and die, and that's a good thing, ironically, right? His missional death is like what climaxes the whole story. So, and the little faith is meant to encourage stronger faith in us. Point Don Versput, one of my mentors, has emphasized in his work. So there's this way that it kind of encourages us to move beyond, to be more of the exemplary disciple in Matthew, which aren't the disciples, the 12, the exemplary disciple of portrayed in all the teachings. But it also, we get them, you know what I mean? It helps us to realize that Jesus is more important than the disciple. That if a disciple fails, Jesus is still there. We see that through the passion narrative when they all flee and Peter is the only one that sticks around, but even he betrays Jesus. But Jesus has said, tell my brothers to meet me in Galilee. The restorative piece at the end is really powerful. If we've been identifying with the disciples, go, oh, it's not about them, it's about Jesus. And you can hear that in the very end, what's called the Great Commission. Matthew doesn't call it that, but it's called the second commissioning. The first commissioning is to the women in chapter 20, and then to the 11 who are left. And Jesus says, all authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, teaching them to obey all I have commanded you, and I will be with you to the end of the age. He doesn't say this. All authority in heaven and earth has been given to me. Go, take it, do what I've told you to do, report back later. He doesn't, that authority is still Jesus's. It's Jesus' authority. We only have it if we stay close to him, and I will be with you. This kind of sense of disciple close to Jesus. I think that's something we get at the end of Matthew as well. It's like, I'm not going to be a perfect disciple, if this is true at all, this story of these disciples, but Jesus is with me. Jesus is with us. I think it's a real corporate moment. Yes, Jesus is with us. So there's this sense of the disciples help us to maybe cling to Jesus even more closely. At least that's what helps. It helps me as I read the disciples in Matthew. I see them as fallible, not awful, not perfect, somewhere between in terms of portrayal. And that just helps us to hang on, try to do better than they do, sure. By the power of Jesus in our midst, we can do as a community more than the disciples did. But we also need Jesus in our midst. Don't forget that piece.
That's right. Yeah, I'm with you. That's awesome. Beautiful.
If you want more conversations like this with the world's leading scholars and skeptics, make sure you hit that subscribe button. New episodes drop every single Monday.